Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst, New York. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond.
Hi, Matt.
Welcome to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK. Let's not waste any time and it's like a rolling stop. There are no stop signs when you talk to Jerry Sullivan, also known as the California stop, depending on where you live. He just kind of rolls right through that stop sign.
I was famous on the radio. Bucky would be introducing the show and I'd be talking.
Well, here you are, Jerry Sullivan, Channel 4 and Niagara Gazette. And he's here on the show to talk a little bit of this and that. I want to start off with the Sabres because you wrote a column for the Niagara Gazette regarding the Sabres. I could tell that you were feeling it as you were writing it, as somebody who reads your work all the time. And I could feel the passion's not quite the right word, but I mean, you obviously, when you get in a groove, you have a hard time containing it. And I think it really comes through in your writing, which is what makes you so great. So let's bring it just back.
I think what you're saying is, though, I don't get as many opportunities to crush the Pagulas as I used to. And that came through. Maybe
that's it, but it was all there. It was, your premise was that the Sabres are the worst organization in all of the major sports. That'll be the wind up. Your thoughts to expound on here.
Well, and not to pump myself up, but it's a fact that I often have better information than anybody in the country. I swear I'm the only person in the country right now pointing out that Elgin Baylor, rest in peace, died yesterday, is the third leading all-time scorer in the NBA. He's not just a great player who made All-Star, third behind Jordan and Chamberlain, okay? The other fact that I've seen be the only person that repeats as if it's some esoteric thing, the Sabres have more top 10 draft picks than any other team in hockey. 10. It was 8 2 years ago. I thought, wow, it's now 10. The average per team is 4. They're the worst team in the league. They're 10 points behind the second worst team in the league. So to call them the worst team in professional sports is maybe too kind. I mean, if not them, who? You tell me the Sacramento Kings have the best talent. They've had all these great drafts in that sport. Or the Seattle Mariners. Who cares about them? They're the worst team in pro sports.
I guess you could.
It's not in dispute, although anybody could dispute it. All the people that like to hate me on Twitter.
I'm just trying to throw out some options because you're asking me. Let's just throw some out there. Washington football team. The fact that they're just even named football team is might be.
They're on the rise. That seems to be.
They almost made the playoffs.
So you're answering your own question. Although,
or did they make the playoffs?
They did make the playoffs.
They did make the playoffs.
They won their division.
Well.
So I'll bail you out.
When have the Sabres done that?
You were
it's tough.
might have
It's
been the
tough
first
to find.
person to stop calling them the Redskins, though.
It's tough to find a combination of extended losing in the last 10 years and organizational dysfunction that matches the Sabres. There are some that have one or the other, but they've had a random successful season. The Jaguars come to mind as a pretty poorly operated franchise, and they've had a lot of losing over the last 15 to 20 years. They had a couple of random decent seasons, but that was, they had the one where they beat the Bills in the playoffs and went to the AFC Championship game. So I guess that by default makes them better than the Sabres. I can't think of too many others in football that are, there's too much parity in football to be as bad as the Sabres have been for as long. I mean, the Jets are a pretty lousy organization. The Lions, really stink. And they had a lot of top 10 picks too, right? Like to Jerry's point, like that's kind of what the Sabres are, is what the Lions
How
have been
about the
for a
New
long
York
time.
Mets? With everything that the Mets have gone through off the field and all of their embarrassments, maybe the Mets.
Yeah, but they've won recently. I mean, yeah, the Sabres don't have a black eye on their organization in terms of misconduct like some of these other places do, like the Mets, like you talked about.
Redskins.
But still, in terms of the on-field / on-ice product, it is pretty difficult to argue Jerry's point.
And they don't have any kind of built-in excuse about a small market. In some other sports, maybe if you look at the Sacramento Kings, the rules are stacked against smaller franchises in other sports. And in hockey, Buffalo should be one of the best franchises in the NHL. So if you're grading it on a curve, I think the Sabres are worse than some of these other franchises that have maybe built-in excuses.
And they lost on purpose. And since then have had just all, number one, number two. And the Houston Astros tanked and won the World Series. Other teams have lost on purpose. The Sixers aren't doing a great job.
Right.
And when people defend the Sabres, to me, it's like, well, look at Houston Astros and Philly. Okay, fine. If you think the tank was okay, they're the worst team in hockey, and they lost on purpose.
I do think the tank is okay because it does work, I think, more often than not in a lot of sports if you do it right. The problem was every other move the Sabres made after they tanked, I think, and the culture that a lot of people blame that tank year, and I think it is more the culture that persisted coming out of that season.
Yeah.
They spend to the cap, too.
It's less effective in hockey, too.
One
player doesn't mean as much.
They have all these top 10 picks that Jerry talked about, but they also spend to the cap. They spend money on veteran players. They are, to Jonah's point, a team that does not lack for resources. Small market, sure, but a big time hockey market, probably the most, one of the best American hockey markets, top 3, and owners who are willing to spend and have spent and have fired coaches and paid coaches to not coach. You can't have as many. It's pretty difficult to have as many resources in the form of draft picks and money invested into a team and be this bad. That's, not easy to do in a league where half the league makes the playoffs every year and they haven't been able to do it. So yeah, I don't know. I think Sully might be onto something here.
Oh, I think Sully's nailed it, and I think a couple of points that I'd like to make that underscore it. They have just lost their 14th straight game, which is their longest losing streak in franchise history. Let's keep in mind that this is a team that had filed for bankruptcy and had its owners arrested and had to be taken over by the NHL and Gary Bettman. So this team is worse than that. And also, and John Vogel has made this point a number of times, he'll post the lineups from the tank season or from a really bad season and say, that team would smoke this year's team. And so even a team that tried to lose on purpose, and it wasn't just trying to lose, they went rock bottom. They gutted the organization to try to get that number 1 draft pick. And number 2 was a nice consolation. Yes. I mean, they were guaranteed one of 2 players. But this season's team is way worse than even the team that tried to lose on purpose. And it's, I don't know. What was your reaction, Jerry, to the Sabres decision to fire Ralph Kruger? Obviously, that many consecutive losses, it had to happen at some point. You knew he was done, but I don't know that this season it makes a difference. I think it was mostly just out of pride that they had to get rid of Ralph Kruger. It's not as though Granato is going to come in and be the spark. If they were looking for that, then they should have made a move a month earlier.
Yeah, it was arrogant at best to hire him with this idea. They're going to come up with a different idea instead of hiring a hockey person. I mean, we're long overdue to get a hockey type person. The names that are out there like a Boudreau, in the old days, Rick Dudley, anyone that would come in. The signature bad move they've made is now about 7 years old, is what they did with LaFontaine. That encapsulated everything wrong with this team and this community and this media, because one of the problems is the enablers in the local media who will swallow everything that the Sabres do and always assume the best of them. And the Tank was the worst example of that. But when LaFontaine left here, people were quick to they wanted to believe that Patty had some mental problem. His problem was Kim Pegula. Maybe the fact that Kim is a woman covers them a little bit, because you can't, if you attack a woman nowadays, then, and I've seen what's happened at times, with Harrington going after her, oh, is it because she's a woman? It's because they're incompetent in running a hockey team. So I don't even know where I began with that, but
Ralph LaFontaine.
He was just the latest victim, Ralph Kruger. The problem obviously goes to the top of the organization. The other people that get too much enabling is the players. I mean, the next Skinner contract, is that going to be Sam Reinhart? He's never won a thing. He coasts at times. He's got a lot of skill, and because he's having a career year for the worst team in professional sports, they're going to give him a big contract. And when I suggest he's not worth it, I get crushed on Twitter. But you can't pay attention to Twitter, because that's a community also that sort of falls into line here with the people who will enable this team. Because if you're critical of the team, then you're a bad guy, whatever. But if they should clean out all these guys. And I'd be trying to move Eichel, because he's going to want out badly at some point anyway, if not already.
You were the only one that I read writing the Jeff Skinner column when they signed the contract, that it wasn't a good contract and it wasn't a good move. I think most people thought the Sabres either had to do that or were making a good decision extending his contract. And I remember at the time you said, it was too much money.
Well, I was on the radio show. It's like, what do you mean they had to do it? How can a responsible, critical media person buy that argument that you have to do stuff? Do you follow sports? You don't have to do anything. They didn't have to trade O'Reilly, which is where that started. Oh, he lost his passion for the game. Yeah, right. But because of that, you had to sign Skinner? Really? Go back and look at your comments if you bought that argument, and tell me how you have credibility as a hockey observer.
You had to sign Thomas Vanek after losing Chris Drury and Daniel Briere. And I think that everybody looked back and said, boy, we wish we had all those draft picks. If we hadn't matched the Edmonton Oilers offer sheet, the Sabres would have had a boatload of picks, first rounders. You don't have to do anything, but you can be forced into it by fan sentiment or embarrassment. And it seems as though that the Pegulas have their hands forced a lot. Their big decisions or their big ideas eventually get to such a point where they are forced to admit that that it gets so bad. And now we're looking at, Kevin Adams in the goaltending situation, which is something that I think while Ralph Kruger was the head coach, everybody could overlook, because you could just point to Ralph Kruger. It's not working. Well, Ralph Kruger coaches the players that are available to him. And yes, it's true that I'm sure he had quite a bit of influence on who was on that roster, because Kevin Adams is a first-year general manager. He's never done it before. But here they're in a situation where they don't have any goaltenders, and they needed goaltenders before the season began and just neglected the position. They thought that they were going to be fine. At what point do maybe the Pegulas wake up and say, you know what, this Kevin Adams experiment, let's cut bait on this one and try to turn the page as quickly as we can. I mean, I don't know their thinking on that, but they do change their minds pretty quickly. And if somebody gets to them and convinces them, I think, who knows, maybe Kevin Adams doesn't get to stick around too much longer.
You're asking me?
This year would be.
I'm just rolling it out there for the class.
Maybe the next coach should be an experienced hockey guy who could one day become the president and run the show the way so many people have done around this league. That was the thought with Kruger. Well, that's gone. I don't know whether he ever believed he was going to become president, they were going to hire a real coach or not. But I don't see how in such a short period of time their feelings on Adams could change. You knew what you were getting. You were getting a guy in the cheap who had no business being a general manager, and you're going to give it a shot. I mean, I would, if that's their feeling, they got to give him a longer time than this. And this
He
isn't,
still doesn't have an assistant general manager, and the guy who was filling that role, in that de facto assistant general manager role, Charlie Mandola, has been fired. He was let go as somebody who was, helping out with the Academy of Hockey or over at Harbor Center. He was let go in the layoffs. I don't know if he was laid off or furloughed, but then Kevin Adams brings him back as one of his chief allies, and now he's gone. So now Kevin Adams is naked. He has a trade deadline coming up. He has one of the more coveted players in the game. I'm sure the Sharks are circling because they see where the Sabres are in the standings. There are teams out there that would love to have Jack Eichel, and whether he's up for bids or not, he's getting the calls. And do you want him
29 other teams?
Yeah, that's right. You're right. The Kraken, even, maybe they have no assets and they're trying to find a way to get him. Yeah, I mean, do you want Kevin Adams fielding all these calls? I mean, they have no choice at this point. Kevin Adams is got to run this team. He's got to find a goaltender or 2 or 5 or 7.
I think the half measure they could take, beyond completely moving on from Kevin Adams, because as Sully said, it's so soon to do that. You couldn't have expected this guy to come in and be a seasoned general manager making all these shrewd moves, because most of the reason for hiring seemed to be convenience. He was there. He's a bit of a yes man. He's loyal to them. They brought that up, and cheap. I think it was easy. The way to, undermine him a little bit and take away some of his power would be to hire somebody above him, as people have been clamoring for around here for a long time. I don't know if they'll do it, but I don't think you can trade Jack Eichel until you have somebody else in there besides this guy who has not done this before and could very easily get fleeced. If you're trading Jack Eichel, you better get some pieces in return that will help you speed up a rebuild. You better not be looking at it in 2 years saying, gee, I hope Tage Thompson turns a corner here. That would make that O'Reilly trade a little bit easier to handle. You can't get those types of players. It needs to be a much higher bar to trade that guy away, because I understand everybody wants to push these guys out the door and start fresh, get rid of Reinhart, get rid of Eichel, get rid of, Skinner, whoever. But if you're not bringing any talent back on the other end, then in 2 years, you're saying the same thing. It's the same thing as O'Reilly. Oh, they gotta just trade Eichel. Well, you don't have, as Sully said, you don't have to trade Eichel. Like, you don't have to do it. You have to get a good return. You have to, find a way to get some assets and get some good players. And right now, Jack Eichel is one of the only good ones they have. So trading him away should not be done lightly, and it should not be done by a general manager who's never really done this before, because that's a recipe for, getting fleeced and having to, set yourself back another few years.
It should be off the table right now for Kevin Adams to make that move, and also to trade Jack Eichel right now when he's hurt and having the worst year of his career and probably not at the peak of his value. If you bring in new people above Kevin Adams or an entirely new regime and they decide it's time to start over, then you may have those conversations and make the move at that time. But I think it would be reckless for the Sabres, for ownership, or whoever makes the final decision to decide to trade Jack Eichel right now.
It would be the worst. It would be, people joke around about rock bottom and it can't get any lower. That would be it. If they did it at the deadline without any input from anybody other than Kevin Adams, all due respect to him. And I think he probably does deserve a little bit more leeway than getting fired, at season's end or before the season's over. But letting him make that trade at the deadline, not only, like you said, Jonah, a pretty bad season for Eichel because he's been banged up, but the Sabres also have pretty much zero leverage, right? Everybody knows that Kevin Adams is in over his head a little bit. He's flailing. This organization is desperate beyond, any other team in the league. The way they're losing, the stories that come out of here, the way the Pagulas have seemingly just been guessing and throwing stuff at the wall. There's no leverage. You wait till the offseason, you give yourself time. Like I said, it's not a must do. You don't have to get rid of this guy. He's a really good player. Is he as good as Connor McDavid? Was he worth everything that had to happen to get him? Maybe not, but he's here. He's really good when he's healthy. And there's a way to build a team around him. His contract's not prohibitive. So, yeah, if they do it, they have to do it at the right time and they have to get the right return, because I just don't see how you can do it at the deadline. It would shock me, and it would be the worst. It would be the worst thing that has happened yet. It would lower the floor. The rock bottom would be even lower.
It would be like the Braves.
Wait a minute. This is they're at rock bottom, and I understand.
Well, they've been at rock bottom, and it keeps going lower.
You want to wait for the best time to trade Jack Eichel? Wait 2 more years. His agent, if he's not already doing, is going to be in there going, "Get this guy out of here," and that word will be around the league. I think, if anything, people are overestimating that guy. I don't think he's one of the top 15 players in the NHL, and he has a lot of talent, but no one wants to even consider he's not that good. And he's certainly not a leader, and he's not a winner. And I think what has to be done here is acknowledging these guys aren't winners. And in this sport, if you believe all that crap about hockey and the intangibles, you've brought in one after another guy who seems to lack that. And yeah, you want to get the most for Jack Eichel. I'm just saying, I'm not so sure a year from now, if you brought in the next John Muckler, you'd get a whole lot more. And what they need, by the way, is the next John Muckler, a guy with a vision of hockey, a guy who came into this organization and identified guys like Pekka and Verata, who no one even knew about. And he also found Hasek, who knew the game and the league. They're so far away from that. It's depressing.
The current John Muckler might not be
than
much of a drop-off.
How is that any different, though, than the Ryan O'Reilly conversation? This idea that, like, oh, maybe Jack Eichel's not that good. He's not a winner. He's not a leader. People said all the same things about Ryan O'Reilly, and then all of a sudden he looked like a winner to me when he was drinking beer out of the Stanley Cup. He looked like a leader to me when a year later, he was a huge catalyst to the Blues' run to the Stanley Cup. I'm not saying Jack Eichel is untouchable or he's, the best player in hockey, but all the stuff people are saying sounds a lot like what people were saying about Ryan O'Reilly. And as it turned out, if everything around him was a little bit better, we've talked about, did Jack Eichel get the captain, the C on his shirt too early? Should he have ever had it? Maybe not. Maybe that's not him, but does that mean he can't be part of a Stanley Cup team here? I don't think so. I don't think you just trade away a good player, a really good player, just because a bunch of people have repeated over and over that he doesn't win, when all that's ever been around him is incompetence, and all that's ever been around him is it can be a combination of things, but it can't be a horribly run organization at the top with terrible general managing and a vacuum at the president of hockey operations and terrible coaches and no leadership on the team, but also Jack Eichel's fault. So trading him seems counterproductive when, unless you're doing it with a plan. I think about the Flyers getting rid of Jeff Carter and Mike Richards all those years ago. They brought in some guys on the other end. Now, it didn't work out because guess what? Jeff Carter and Mike Richards, those guys were losers and they weren't leaders, but they looked like winners when they were, drunk with the Stanley Cup. It's crazy how that happens. So Jack Eichel might look like a loser now. Trade him out of here, and I wouldn't be surprised you see a winner, a happy guy. So things around them, and the Flyers, by the way, haven't won a cup. They got all these good things in return. They end up with Sean Couturier, and Wayne Simmons was a good player, and they got some talent back for those guys. But those guys helped somebody else win a Stanley Cup. So, but the Flyers had to do it because those guys weren't buying into the team concept and blah, blah, blah. well, maybe the team concept is junk. Maybe if there's something to buy into, those guys will. And it's why I think we're having this exact same conversation that we're criticizing people for having before. You got to trade Ryan O'Reilly, you got to sign Jeff Skinner. It's like you don't have to trade Jack Eichel, and I don't think they should behave that way. Now, could it get to that point if the agent starts making waves? And it seems like everyone and their brother has written a should X team trade for Jack Eichel? Everybody wants him, so if you can get the right return, then sure. But doing it just to do it, I think is really foolish.
Well, I think this is a good transition because you just mentioned Ryan O'Reilly and not having success, change of scenery. Let's talk about the NFL's Ryan O'Reilly, Mitchell Trubisky, now out of Chicago. He should probably be fitted for his Super Bowl ring right now, along with the rest of the Buffalo Bills. Jerry, your thoughts on Mitchell Trubisky finally escaping Chicago and coming to football heaven in Orchard Park?
I think it's a heck of a deal for them. I mean, they've got the money apparently, and it's a reasonable deal. Matt knows more about the money, but I think he's a heck of an athlete. I think that's one of the reasons he was drafted high. Did they overpay for him? Obviously, is he a franchise guy? No, but I think as a backup to Josh, with his, I would say, similar athletic ability, I think it's a great backup. I think the Bills have had deficient backup quarterbacking for a long, long time, even going back to when I was trying to tell people even Lawson wasn't even a good NFL backup.
Wait, Jerry, are you saying that even when their starters were backups, they were inadequate? Because EJ Manuel was their backup for a little while, and maybe he was even an adequate backup.
He didn't belong.
Nathan Peterman was a starter who then became backup. So yeah, you're right. Their backup quarterbacks weren't even good enough to be backups, and yet they were starting.
Yeah, and they're lucky that Josh didn't get hurt last year, because this idea, because he played one good game against the Jets, that Barkley could carry them to the Super Bowl, and do a Nick Foles thing was ridiculous.
The offense would have to change 180 degrees.
Yeah, and I think Trubisky is capable. How much is he making? Is it
$2.5 million, right?
Oh, geez.
That's less than you make, Jerry.
It is. It's still good money.
It's a great deal for the Bills. It's a great deal for both. Well, I mean, Trubisky, I'm curious of what other options he had, so that way we can compare really how great of a deal it is for Trubisky. But if his agent plotted it out to say, look, let's sign this deal now. The TV revenues are going to be announced soon. And when that gets announced, then we'll go for the big contract. The big backup money is coming once, whether you're backup or your starter. He's going to make so much more money now that the salary cap's about to skyrocket with these new the new TV rights deals. But yeah, go someplace, kind of rehabilitate your image, play for a winner. And it builds a little mystique too, because then people wonder, maybe some stuff rubbed off. You playing for Brian Dable, even if Mitchell Trubisky doesn't play it down, people are going to wonder, or people are going to probably say, well, I'm sure he got better, just, learning and getting ready and whatever. And maybe then he can recapture that 10-win season that he had as a rookie and all that stuff. But yeah, it's a great deal for the Bills. It seems to be a no-brainer, and a position that they really did need to upgrade. It was overlooked. Getting into the backup quarterback situation when Josh Allen is in the driver's seat really there's not a lot of interest in talking about that, I guess. But yeah, it seemed like to be sitting there as a glaring need for all the reasons that Brandon Beane brought in Mitchell Trubisky.
I'm more excited about Sanders. Interested in what you guys have to think, because I think he's a clear upgrade over what John Brown was this past year. And, veteran receiver. It seems to me over the years, receivers have been, certain ones anyway, have been very effective into the 30s, take care of themselves, even Beasley at this point. I think their offense is in really good shape, and I expect Sanders to be a real positive addition.
My only concern with Sanders, and you mentioned Beasley there, the age, and I mean, what if the Bills have to go even a couple of games without both of them? I mean, I don't think that that's a stretch to think that somebody's got a calf tweak or a hamstring, and you have Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis are now your two best options, right? Unless I'm missing somebody, but I mean, to lose both those guys. So you are risking a little bit because of the age and the fact that these guys have been hurt a little bit, but John Brown's injury situation had to be maddening for the Bills to get ready on a week-to-week basis, to not know whether or not they were going to have this guy. I think that so for that reason alone, I agree with you, Jerry, that Sanders is an upgrade.
Yeah, but they were old last year, and I think I pointed that out once or twice, that no team was older than them at wide receiver in their top three. They had two of the 30-plus guys, which I don't think any other team did. Now you add another 30-plus guy. They're trying to win now, and I don't know. I mean, maybe they'll add someone else in free agency or the draft. They did a pretty good job of it last year in the draft.
What else is out there, Matthew? Let me leave it to you. Free agency. We haven't had a show since things really got rolling. What's your take on what they've done so far in the open period, not just re-signing their guys? Because I think that all happened the last time we had a podcast. Now they've gone out and gotten some other teams' guys.
Yeah, I think because of who they are and what they've built, they've really changed what they can do. Now they're certainly in a tougher financial situation than they've been in, but Mitchell Trubisky coming here for $2.5 million and thinking he can rebuild his career in a place where quarterbacks used to go to have their careers ruined, I think it says something about who they are and what they've done. Now, I'm curious to see how that'll work out. And they don't think it was a long-term thing. They think it's just short-term, and he'll, springboard this into becoming a starter somewhere. And when you see the money Tyrod Taylor and Andy Dalton have gotten elsewhere, then you think Trubisky probably does, fall in line with that. Like you said, Tim, when the money goes up with these new TV deals, he might be in a good spot. But it's interesting to think of the Bills as that type of destination, when last year that was the Saints with Jameis Winston going there, taking less money and trying to rebuild his career. So we don't know how much less money. We don't know that there was some sort of crazy bidding war for Mitchell Trubisky's services. I doubt there was, considering there's a few teams out there that could use a starter, and he certainly would have taken that opportunity first. But, all in all, they needed that. They needed to get better. Matt Barkley wasn't good enough, and they're paying only slightly more than Matt Barkley. I think the Sanders signing is pretty interesting. Both he and Cole Beasley, I think, can do some damage out of the slot, and I'm interested to see what they do when they have four receivers on the field. When everybody's healthy, how big of a role does Sanders have? I don't know, because you would think Gabriel Davis has earned that number 2 job, but they're going to make him fight for it, clearly. They save a little bit of money by going from John Brown to Emmanuel Sanders. Not a tremendous amount. They gave him a pretty decent deal. But again, like with Trubisky, the fact that a guy like Sanders wants to come here when there's only potentially 1 or 2 years left on his career and he's trying to win, it's a change of pace, I think, for this organization, that this guy, you basically are able to get Sanders and the tight end, Jacob Hollister, who they signed, for the price of John Brown, which I think is a pretty good trade-off, because Sanders seems to take really good care of himself, has still been effective in recent years, practices like a madman. If he stays healthy, he'll be an upgrade over John Brown, because John Brown couldn't do that last year. So I think they're good, subtle moves. The biggest thing to me is, and we sort of touched on this before, the tampering window opened, but bringing back that same offensive line, bringing back essentially the same defensive line, are those 2 spots good enough? Because I thought in some key games last year, they got beat up in both of those areas. And I don't think they should be done addressing those spots. And that's where the Sanders thing, to me, it's opportunity cost. It's not Sanders versus John Brown. It's not Sanders for $6 million. It's Sanders for $6 million when Hassan Reddick went for $6 million, or Sanders for $6 million when an edge rusher, a veteran edge rusher might have gone for $6 million. That's where I think you have to measure that, because what do they need more, and bringing back this O-line, again, there's cost associated with that. John Feliciano for $5 million, or, a guy in the draft and spend that $5 million somewhere else. So as long as if they go into next season with basically the same offensive and defensive lines, I think that's a pretty big risk. And they got worse on the defensive line because they got rid of Quentin Jefferson. So they get Starr back, but they lose Quentin Jefferson. So probably a bit of a wash.
Matt makes a real good point. I think that defensive line is a question. As well as they played defensively down the stretch, which they tend to do under McDermott, there were games where they just got run over and they didn't get enough pass rush. I don't know if Star Latulele is going to be that much of a difference. We do tend to, and I'm guilty of it here, overreact to skill player additions, wide receiver, backup quarterback, in the trenches, as we like to say in the old days. That's where these games tend to be won. We found that out in the Super Bowl for sure.
And the AFC Championship.
Good point.
In the AFC Championship, they could not get anywhere near Mahomes. And the Chiefs were all over Josh Allen throughout that game. So, and they sort of addressed both of those spots at the end of the season, when they were talking about this team, and they end up bringing back a pretty similar group. Mario Addison's going to be 34 years old, and he's coming off his lowest sack production in quite a few years. You're counting on a jump from AJ Epinesa, or maybe getting a guy at 30. And then we have people talking about, they got to draft a running back at 30 to put this team over the top. And it's like, so they're just going to go out there and, I think one of those spots needs to be addressed. Number 2 corner is still a need. Wide receiver wasn't a glaring need, but I get the idea of, don't lose your fastball and, keep it going. But I say, draft a guy in the second or third round and let Gabriel Davis take, if your quarterback's that good, he should elevate a number 4 receiver, essentially, because that's what Sanders is going to be. Or maybe, the number 2 opposite, instead of Gabriel Davis. But I think you could have found that in the draft. And it's more about what it takes away. It's not really a Sanders thing, because I think he's a fine player and I think the money is fine for him. It's just about where else could that have been spent, because it was either the next day or hours before Hassan Reddick, was a pass rusher / linebacker, went for around $6-7 million. It's like, man, if you could have gotten that, throw a couple extra million on it and make it $8 million to convince him to not go play for his college coach again in Carolina. Guy had 12 sacks last year. That's exactly what they're missing. And if you're going to roll the ball out there with this same group rushing the passer, I think it's a risk. Pass rushers can be productive well into their 30s, but you're leaning on 2 guys in Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison who are going to be 33 and 34. So you're not getting much younger, and you're counting on your second-round pick, Epinesa, or maybe your top 10 pick at Oliver, being the guys that take the jump and give you what you need. That and the offensive line, I think, are the 2 big questions, and they didn't really do anything to answer either one just yet.
Before we let Jerry Sullivan go, I want to make sure that we get into his wheelhouse in college basketball. I want to talk about Daemen and both their men's and women's teams doing very well in the Division II tournament. But let's just get your general thoughts, Jerry, on the Division I tournament so far. Maybe you have some thoughts on St. Bonaventure, or maybe even UB just missing out. And then just whatever your general observations might be on the rest of the first couple of rounds.
I've been in heaven. You know me with the sleepers over the years and wanting these smaller schools to rise up and knock off the big money power schools. Well, there were more 13, 14, 15s to win in the first round than ever before. If Rutgers hadn't blown that lead, that one region with Syracuse would be an 8, 10, 11, and 12 seed in the Sweet 16. Loyola, I picked them again to the Final Four. I hate to gloss myself, but I did pick them to the Final Four in 2018. Sister Jean's still there, talked her way into the traveling party, 101 years old. How do you pick against Loyola? And they're a really good team. This is no fluke. They play basketball. and they're underrated as opposed to all these Big Ten schools that were clearly overestimated. It's a great tournament for that. The kind of tournament I've always wanted more of, where the gap between the big schools and the little guy wasn't so great. And a 1-8, that was Loyola beating Illinois. You know what else is a 1-8? Daemen. They're an 8 in the Elite 8 of Division II. I talked to Mike McDonald yesterday doing a story, and they're playing a really good team in this. I think it's West Texas A&M.
Got that right.
West Texas A&M. They've got 2 really great guards, but good for them. Good for Daemen, and the women are there too.
Who are they playing?
The women, I haven't looked that up yet. You wrote about it.
I do know. Lubbock Christian, #1 team in women's college, Division II women's college basketball.
I must have been busy trading for Luca in the fantasy league, Jonah. When
Yeah, that was a
I
good
should have
move.
been looking that up. So great time of year for basketball. Looking forward to the NBA taking off, and I will give Matt some credit for turning me on to a book called Beartown. For you readers out there, Matt and I have talked about starting a book club. Beartown by Frederick Bachman, and they made it into a TV show. It's in Danish subtitles, so but it's great, and the TV show is great. I'm at that point, I've watched a lot of TV during the pandemic. I watch everything with subtitles now, even the English stuff. Well, especially the Brits and the Scots. That's barely English. You can't understand them. But when you're old and your hearing's going and you get distracted, having this stuff at the bottom to read, great. So I'm a little going off topic here, but
Did you read the sequel too?
I'm on that now.
Yeah, that one was good. I have not watched the TV show yet. I still gotta splurge for the HBO subscription, but I've been meaning to watch it. It looks like it's pretty good. And
Well, before we devolve into book club, can we talk about Daemen a little bit more?
Sure.
Jerry, give us a sneak peek of your column that's coming up.
Well, it starts with Mike McDonald showing up in Evansville. I think it was Monday morning at 2 a.m. and turning on the TV, and Hoosiers is playing. Like Mike McDonald, you've dealt with Mike. I mean, you turn on the tape recorder and, he takes care of your column. But if I can't work with that, for starters, he also last week.
It probably wasn't true. That's how much I know Mike
You know
McDonald.
what?
He's so mindful of writing a good story that he said, when I talk to Jerry, I'm going to tell him that Hoosiers was on when I got to my hotel room.
yeah, you might want to check the TV guide, get
Yeah,
a
you might-
second source on that.
I want to Google what was actually showing at 2:00.
Well, if you've been watching CNN and MSNBC lately, or even Fox, you realize truth doesn't get in the way of anything nowadays, and it's certainly a good story or a good argument in Congress. Also, last week was the 25th anniversary of Canisius getting to the NCAA for the only time in the last some 63 years. And Mike was an assistant on that team, and there was a kid named Mickey Frazier who he'd sworn the year before when they lost, I'm going to sit on top of the rim like that other kid did when we lost if we win next year. So he does, and they win in 96. Masiello's there, I'm there, and he sits on the rim. Well, Mike told his kids this story, and of course one of his players Googles the thing, gets the picture of Mickey Frazier and passes it around, and Mickey Frazier writes an emotional letter to the team just about how you have to treasure this time of your career. And no, he sent that letter before they win the East Regional and get to the Elite 8 for the first time. So what I'm saying is it's not a heavy lift for column here. I just have to do some typing. That's why I was able to give you an hour of my time.
Yeah, just don't screw it up. That's your
Not
only
like
mission
this,
on
but
when you
I
have
to
that
do
kind of
100
material.
interviews and get real information the way you do.
Well, only 75% of mine's factual.
And as long as I'm stroking people here, your piece on Mark Schmidt was the definitive profile. Well done.
I had too much material. It actually, there's a lot of, it was not the cleanest file I've ever made to my editors, but I was rushing to get it in because the game was Saturday. It had to run on Friday. And there was a lot of material there. Jonah, your thoughts on Daemen here before we wrap it up? What do you think of the matchup? I mean, you've taken a look at it.
They're both tough matchups. I mean, West Texas A&M has won more games over the last 3 years than any other NCAA team. So more than Gonzaga, more than Virginia, more than any other team at any level. And Lubbock Christian was national champion in 2019, that would have been, and was undefeated before the tournament last year and undefeated this year. So that's a tough matchup. But it's great for Daemen's the only school with a team in the men's and women's national quarterfinals. And I don't know how often that happens, but that seems like quite the accomplishment, especially for a program that's only been eligible for the Division II tournament for 7 years. And as far as the men, every one of the seniors, including All-American Andrew Sisko, is planning to come back next year. I think the women's team, which is also senior heavy, will probably have a few key players choosing to come back for that bonus year. So this could be the beginning of another big run for the Daemen basketball programs next year.
You go to Mike Jonah for real information.
Right.
And also want to acknowledge the women's coach, Jennifer Banker, who former Canisius player and coached at Canisius and has coached at Grand Island High School, was a very successful coach there. And then coming to the Division II level. She's coached Division I before as an assistant, but that's, I think, a big jump going from high school to Division II college, and has built this team into they've been nationally ranked all season long.
But she's married to Brett Banker, correct?
Yes.
Big shot in high school basketball, high school sports.
Athletic director for the Kenton schools, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have his autograph on my varsity basketball plaque from 21 years ago.
You have his autograph?
Yeah, just a thing that at my parents' house. It's not even real. It's like printed, but it's got Brett Banker's signature to certify that I played about 10 minutes a game.
Hey, let's wrap this up with a philosophical discussion. Jonah and I had this conversation last night. He's unsure about it. I have an answer. He seems to have gone one way, gone opposite my wishes. Jonah, you go. This is your conundrum, so I'll let you pose the question to the.
Yes. Well, when I'm writing it, I'm not so sure that the elite. I think the Elite Eight is the Elite Eight, just like the Final Four, the 8 teams that are remaining in the big dance, the NCAA tournament. I do acknowledge that there's a women's Elite Eight and a women's Final Four, but I don't necessarily think there's an Elite Eight for Division II, an Elite Eight for Division III, an Elite Eight for junior college, and an Elite Eight for high school, an Elite Eight for basketball camp. I mean, that's a lot of 8s. Now we're talking about an Elite 128, I think. So I don't know. When does the Elite Eight start and when does the Elite Eight begin?
My response to that is if there's a national champion, then there's an Elite Eight. That's
there's
your
a national champion of cornhole. So is there an Elite Eight?
So then it's your
cornhole?
cornhole Elite Eight. You're not confusing it with Gonzaga.
What about the NFL playoffs when it's down to 8 teams? Is that an Elite Eight with 2 capital E's?
It's more of a basketball thing.
It's a basketball thing.
Right. I'll tell you what being an Elite Eight is if the Sabres ever get back to the Eastern Conference playoffs.
There you go.
That would be that's a Final Four.
No, there's 8 teams in each conference that make the NHL playoffs, Tim.
Oh, but you said the Eastern Conference Finals, though, didn't you? Or did I mishear you?
I may have said that.
I think it's individual silos, right? You're an Elite Eight within your group of teams. Like it was in Massachusetts high school hockey, it used to be the Super 8 is what it was, the final 8 teams.
Which is a cool thing. Different sports have their different lingos. But what I don't necessarily like is when the high schools, they make it to the state semifinals and it's like, we're in the Final Four.
There might be an actual legal answer to this in that it reminds me when Matthew says that they are called the Super 8, they probably can't call themselves the Elite 8 because it's been trademarked. So if the NCAA calls it the Elite 8 in Division II, then capital E for Elite, capital E for 8, it's trademarked.
They don't really use it in it seems like more of a basketball thing too. And you're right, it might be trademarked at the by the NCAA.
By the NCAA
for basketball, but like
for Division II, but
they don't use it for hockey, right? They don't. I mean, now it's not as big of a tournament,
Frozen
so it's not.
Four. No,
but it's the Frozen.
Yeah, they call it the Frozen Four.
But I don't know that they use Elite 8 or if there's some other play on it being cold that they use for that, or the Sweet 16 or whatever, the slippery 16 since it's on ice. I don't know. but I don't think they do that. So it seems like more of a basketball thing. But I'd say
The
you know,
sheet 16.
yeah, I'd say if you're in D2 and you're in the final 8, those are still big fields, right? So I don't
Yeah,
know,
it's normal in a normal year. It's a little smaller this year, but yeah, it's the same
I
number.
say roll tide, go for it. Elite 8, whatever makes you happy.
Jerry Sullivan from Channel 4 and from the Niagara Gazette. Thanks for joining us.
Well, you're welcome. I'm not a big fan of someone thanks you for coming on and then you thank them. I think I don't like that.
You don't want to thank me for the opportunity?
I came on your show, you thanked me, and I said, you're welcome. If I thank you, then
Right.
we're even. I think you're the big winner here.
That's true. It's absolutely true. You're doing me the favor.
This is the Elite Four. No, is it 5? 4. I can't even count. Give me
5? Where's the 5th?
I counted myself.
The guy was doing my basement. He left, so he's not.
So
even
it was 5 for a time.
It was 5 for probably a good
Oh, God,
for a good 45 minutes.
And Sully's under Melinda's account, so it's really
I know.
he's 2.
That's you noticed that, huh?
She's
Like,
lurking.
I don't do much Zooming. When I do, it's because of her.
All right, guys. Thanks for doing this. We'll catch you next time. To those listening out there or watching on YouTube, thanks for putting up with this. And
Don't mess with
as Matthew Fairburn so eloquently said, roll tide.
Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst, New York. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond.